right, let's talk a little bit about constitutional democracy. Chapter 2 is our history chapter. Now, I love history. I was a history minor, and I kind of went back and forth when I was in school between whether or not I was going to be a history major or a history minor. But I chose political science. Political science is the study of political behavior and trends, and it has a much more modern look. But there's no way that you can talk about politics and trends without looking at history. But I'll be the first to say that political scientists are sometimes a little disrespectful of history, because you'll see it in this textbook, you'll see it throughout the rest of any political science that you take. We pick and choose historical events and have a tendency to look at them as isolated, not related, and use them only to make our point about why things are the way they are today. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the colonies prior to the revolution. So this was the deal. Great Britain was, like other European countries, had a great desire to be a world power. And European countries were pretty single-minded when they were thinking about how does one do that. They did that primarily through acquiring goods and by inserting their power over larger and larger areas which could supply these goods. The theory at the time, and certainly Spain and Portugal and France and the Netherlands, all subscribe to this idea, this theory called mercantilism. And mercantilism basically says that you acquire wealth by exporting goods, and so you sell more goods than you have to bring in. But it also believed that there was a finite amount of goods. And so the way that they acquired control was by settling new lands. And the more land and the more resources that you had control over, the more powerful you were. So Great Britain, Holland, France, Spain, all set sail and went to explore and went to acquire control over new lands. Now, Spain spent a lot of time in North America and South America and Central America. If you look at the surnames of people in these areas, they are all Spanish names. The primary language in most of the countries presently is Spanish, because Spain would come, settle, put a mission in place, convert the people that were there, and subdue the people that would not comply. So all over the southern parts of the United States, all the way up the West Coast, Oregon, California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, over to Florida, those were all Spanish settlements. France, to a smaller extent, settled in North America. Certainly, they spent a short time in Texas, and also in the Louisiana area, Mississippi area. There was French settlement, but Great Britain settled the northeastern, and eventually part of the southeastern part of North America, and much of Canada. There's a couple of French provinces in Canada today, but primarily it was Great Britain. So Holland was really trying to get in on the act. Their whole point was that they wanted to be able to import goods. And as Great Britain started to settle North America, they tried to impose rules. Now, they were a long way away, a couple of weeks, and that was at minimum by boat. It was usually, because of weather, it could take up to 6 weeks for a ship to make it from the English shore to North America. So when Great Britain settled North America, they tried to impose some rules. They were saying you can't import goods from Holland because they are our trade rival, and but again, they did not exercise strict control. How could they? They were too far away. And so, for the most part, the colonists that had come from all over, but a lot of them from England, just ignored. There were rules in place, but the colonists just ignored the rules. And so Great Britain really kind of set up this, we're going to let you govern yourselves. We'll put a colonial governor, and that's where you'll get the information and the messages from the crown, from Parliament and the crown. But you fix it. You govern yourselves. You can elect officials. You can do whatever you need to make life livable there in the colonies. So if we are looking, this is around 1700, and these are in pound increments. Looking from 1500 and stopping at 1800, you will see that around 1750, England just outpaced everyone, outpaced all the other countries, Portugal, Spain, Holland, and France. Now, Portugal was primarily trading slaves, and so they eventually were higher than the other countries, but England was really had the hand and the upper hand in figuring out how they were going to export goods. They had more control over more lands and over more resources that could be exported. I like this slide. This is blatant plagiarism. I don't even know where I got it from. I don't even have credits on here. But it just talks about what was being exported, where it was coming from, and where it was going. And so you can see, we'll start with North America. In North America, they were producing and exporting oil, lumber, furs, especially in the northern parts. From the southern parts, rice, silk, indigo, and tobacco. From the Caribbean islands, sugar, molasses, and wood. And it was primarily going straight to Great Britain. And Great Britain was able to manufacture goods. So you see that they would take the oil and the furs and the wood and the lumber, and they would make goods out of it, and then they would sell those goods back to the colonists. They also exported guns, cloth, iron, and beer as they went and settled and traded in African countries. From Africa, gold, ivory, spices, and hardwoods were exported to Europe, where they also made goods and sold them to the colonies. And there was a tremendous, as we know, slave trade that really kind of ran through the Caribbean islands and then would make its way to North America. So that is just to get a picture of how the world was looking in the early 1700s, early 1800s, and how people were making money, because the whole goal was to export more goods than you were importing. So over in the North American colonies, basically the way that you were able to form a colony was you got a charter, and the charter would say where you could settle. The charter would say under what circumstances you could settle, and as long as you obeyed the charter, then you were fine. So out of necessity, there was very limited government, because Great Britain was not going to be able to dictate day to day what happened. And so people in the colonies got used to making their own rules and not having a lot of consequences for making their own rules. And they formed colonial assemblies where they would elect people, and the people would run the colonies. They would elect governors, they would elect assemblymen, and those people would make the decisions for the colony and make sure that life was bearable. Now, for the most part, these people that had acquired their charters from Great Britain looked at themselves as English subjects. They were Englishmen. And they were in remote outposts, but where they had come from, there were members of parliament. The members of parliament represented different areas in Great Britain, and they did the legislative work. Now, the monarchs had a lot more control, and monarchs had the final say, but for the most part, the details of how this was going to work came from English Parliament, and each area in Great Britain had a representative in Parliament. So there were things that they were used to. They were used to having representation. They were also used to things like serving on a jury or having a trial by jury. These were things that they had become used to and believed that they were entitled to, or at least they had seen in Great Britain. To top it off, the British government was allowing the members of the colonies to actually elect representatives to represent them in the colonies, to do the day-to-day work, to make the rules, to keep order in the colonies. And all Great Britain did was place a royal governor there, and that person was in each of the colonies the representative of the crown of Great Britain. So when there were new rules, they would send word by boat, and from what I can tell, this took 3 to 6 weeks for messages to get from Great Britain to the colonies, depending on the weather. They would send messages, they would send edicts, but for the most part, they allowed the members of the colonies to have their own representative government. So not only had they experienced that when they lived on the island in Great Britain, they were having a new version of that in the colonies. They were having representative government.